So this is going to be an example discussing using a function and some of the particulars of functions in Python. So let's take a look at this simple little function we have up here. Notice then we start with def, then we have the name of the function, of course, but then we have a parameter list. Now this idea of a parameter list is simply when we call a function, we may need to give that function information for it to get its job done. I often like to think of functions as minions, you know, the little minions from the movie. And you might want to ask a minion to do something, like you might want to ask a minion to pick up some things, and you have to tell it, you know, what it is you want it to pick up or how many you want it to pick up. And so you need to give it some information. So this is a mechanism for giving a function some information. So we have this parameter list. This function obviously needs to have two pieces of information. And these variables are, you know, like any variable name, the name is arbitrary. So when I call this function, and we can take a look at line 10 down here, you can see an example of the function call. You'll notice that the function call needs to pass two pieces of information. So in this particular case, I have a variable called num and a variable called val, and I'm passing those to the function. And so the function gets this num value, and it goes into x, and the value of the val variable goes into y. And so then in the body of the function, I can use x and y to refer to those values. Z is a brand new variable that's local just to the function. It can only be seen and used within this function. So we use the values x and y to calculate a new value, and z gets bound to that new value. And then we take the value in z and we add 1 to it, and then z gets bound to the brand new value of whatever z plus 1 is. And finally then we have a return statement, and we return that value. It's kind of like the minion coming back to us and reporting back to us what the result is of whatever we ask the minion to do. So in this example then, here's the call to the function. The function goes off and does its task, and then it returns whatever that value was, and we then, using that assignment operation, we bind the variable result to whatever the value is we got back from this example, the function called example. And then we, of course, can take that variable and print out the result. And so a second example of that here, I'm calling the function again, but this time instead of using variables, I'm just passing a couple values to the function. 5, of course, goes into the variable x in the function. 3, of course, goes into the variable y. It does the various math gyrations, calculates the value for z, and then it returns that value. So a brand new value comes back. We then assign the result. We bind that result variable to that brand new value we get back from our function call, and then we print that one. So let's just pay attention to a few details here. For starters, of course, you have to get the header of your function correct, and it's really easy to forget the colon at the end of that header. The next thing you'll notice, of course, is that in lines 3, 4, and 5, they all have to be indented, otherwise they do not belong to the body of this function. And Python typically uses an indentation of 4 spaces, and Thawning will give you those 4 spaces just by using the tab key. It's still 4 spaces. And so we see then that these 3 statements at lines 3, 4, and 5 belong to the function, whereas the statements starting at statement 7 do not belong to the function because they're not indented. If these statements were indented, of course, they would belong to the function, and they would only execute when you called the function. But we wanted this function to be our little helper up here. You can, again, think of functions as little helpers that do something for you. And so they don't do anything whatsoever other than define the function. When the statement 2 is executed, it simply defines the function, defines the name of the function, and also what are the parameters to that function. So later when you call that function, you'll notice there's the name of the function, and we had to pass it 2 parameters. If I neglected to pass it 2 parameters, I'd get an error message and the program wouldn't run. If I gave it more than 2 parameters, again, I'd have a problem. So noticing what the parameters are is very important. Also, you should keep in mind the type. in this particular example, by looking at the body of the function, you see that I'm doing mathematical operations here on my x and y variables. And so obviously these need to be numbers. So if I passed in strings up here, I'd run into problems. So you have to be very thoughtful, of course, when you're calling a function, like in this particular case. I have to make sure that I'm passing it what the function expects. So in this case, I'm passing it 2 numbers, which is exactly correct, because again, it's going to be doing mathematical operations. So let's just take a look then, a little run of this program. I input a couple of values, and so I just use the regular input statement here. But then I also immediately convert those to integers, and so now I have the correct values. And I then pass those 2 values to my function. Here they're getting passed up to the function. The function is evaluated and returns a result. And then I simply print the result. And we just repeat the process here again. So I'm calling the function again, and this time, of course, the function gets 2 completely different values, very likely, unless, of course, the user input 5 and 3 the first time they did it. But that wouldn't be very interesting. And then it prints the result of that one. Let's just go ahead and run this and see how that executes. So I'll just go ahead and run it. So it's asking me for a number. And we hit enter. It calculates the result as 40. And then, of course, it passes 5 and 3 in, and we get the result of 8. And, of course, if you were to walk through the function and play computer in your head, passing in 5 and 3, well, 5 times 3 is 15, minus 5 plus 3. Whoops, 5. What did I just say there? Yeah. 5 times 3 is 15, minus 5 plus 3, which is 7. So 15 minus 7 is 8. Wait a minute. Oh, 5 plus 3 is 8. See, if you just do the math, right? That's why I let the computer solve my problems for me. Okay, so we got 15 here, and we got 8 here, and 15 minus 8 is 7. So 7 plus 1 is 8. We return that value. It prints the result, of course, and we get the 8 down here. Woo, that was tricky. So let's go ahead and take a look at your code and just go ahead and maybe do some fixing on that thing. So for starters, you got this really nice function header here, and it takes a couple values, hours and rate. So we're going to call this function, and we're going to pass in hours, and we're going to pass in rate. And since we know we're going to do some math on that, these 2 things had better be numbers, of course, so that works properly. And so then we calculate the total pay by multiplying hours times rate. That's cool. That's very good. And then we come down here and we have these 2 input statements. Now these 2 input statements shouldn't be here, and of course they're not indented, so they're not part of the function, but they kind of look like they're going to be part of the function. Well, the function actually stops right there. In other words, the body of the function is just this one statement all by itself. And there's no return or anything. I mean, I can actually space it out a little bit to show you a little different there. So now you see how that's just the function. It calculates total pay, but it doesn't return it. You have to have a return statement to get the value to come back from a function. So, okay, so that's cool. And then we have the input of the hours. So we input hours and we input the rate. That's cool. But then we're checking up here to see if hours is less than or equal to 40, and then we're doing a total pay calculation. Well, this looks like this should be part of the function. This statement looks like it should be part of the function. And also, here's your return statement. And so that looks like that should be part of the function too. So we can actually move these statements to get them up into the body of the function. Why don't we try to do that? I'll see if Thonny allows me to do drag and drop. And notice it doesn't allow me to do drag and drop. But I can obviously do a Control X to zap that out of there. Come up here, paste it. And so now we've got those statements up here. But the problem is, of course, as you can see, they're not indented properly. And so I need to indent these a little bit better to be part of the function, right? So I'll indent that one. That makes it part of the function. But now the total pay calculation you have here is not part of the if statement, so I need to indent that also. So I indent that one. There we go. And now that's looking pretty good. But the return statement, of course, is not part of the function because it's not indented. So I need to indent that. There we go. Now that's indented. But I wouldn't want to indent it one more stop because then it makes it part of the if statement. And that's not what we want. So just back that out. So that's cool. Now let's take a look at one more thing that we've got here, and that is you're checking to see if hours is less than or equal to 40 because you want to give them some overtime. Well, you don't get overtime unless the hours is greater than 40, not less than or equal to 40. So this relational operation here, the less than or equal to, really should be greater than, because we want it to be greater than 40. And so if we do that, we say total pay equals 40 times the rate, which is okay. That's cool. And then because I didn't make my window big enough here, this is not visible, but I could probably scroll over. So 40 times the rate plus, then we take hours minus 40, but you used a variable HRS here, and since we're in the body of the function, we need to be using this variable name hours, and so I just would need to fix the spelling of that. So hours minus 40, so that gets us the hours that we worked overtime. And then we multiply that times rate times 1.5. That gets us the overtime rate, which is fantastic. So that's cool. So I think that this formula that you have here now looks like it's a winner. So let's just look at it again. So we calculate the total pay based on the hours, and then we say, wait a minute, what if they worked more than 40? And I'm going to put a blank line in there. What if they worked more than 40? Then, we want to calculate a different total pay, which gives them the 40 hours at their regular rate plus the overtime hours times time and a half. That sounds a little more reasonable. Okay, so now we got a nice little function here, and I'll just space out a little bit. We got a nice little function here called compute pay that needs to have hours passed in and rate passed in, and it should return a total pay. Now let's scroll on down. Okay, so here is the first executable statement of our program. It's an input statement. That's cool. Enter hours and stores, it binds the value the user types into this thing called HRS. And then same thing for rate here. That's cool. And then I'm going to get rid of some blanks here. Then you say print pay. Well, pay is not a variable in your program at this point. There's no variable called pay. But we can go ahead and create that variable by, typing in the variable name and assigning a value to it. Now the value we want to assign to pay would be calling our function with the hours and the rate values passed in as parameters. So let's go ahead and do it. So to call a function, you give the name of the function, compute pay, there's the name, and then the parameter list needs to include the two pieces of information. And the two pieces of information in this case would be hours and rate. And you got to get the spellings right. There, we called that one HRS, hours, so we'll type HRS. And then the rate is the second one. So whatever value is in HRS gets up here, and it gets stored in that variable. And then whatever value that's in this variable right here, rate, gets stored up here in this variable. Now you have to realize these are completely different variables. In other words, HRS is a variable, it's an object, and it's got this label HRS on it. And the same thing with rate. And then when we call the function, brand new variables get created. So a brand new object up here is labeled hours, H-O-U-R-S, and then we get a brand new one up here also, but it happens to have the same name. There's not a problem with that. But don't get confused about these variables, because essentially what's getting happened is the value is getting transferred up here. So the value is getting transferred up here, and so then you have this new variable. It's local to the function. This variable is local to the function. This variable is local to the function. So any variables declared in the body of the function like this are local, and any variable in the parameter list are local to the function. And we can do whatever we want with those variables, as you see here, but they don't have any impact on these variables, because these are global variables to the entire program. They don't belong to this function. So we do the compute pay, it calculates, it returns total pay. The variable pay then is bound to that return value, and then we can print it. Well, let's do something really simple. Let's put in, for starters, we're going to try this. I'm going to clear the output down here. We're going to run this and see if it works. Now, we might have a mistake in our program. We'll find out. If we don't, though, let's put in a simple thing like 40 hours at $10 an hour. So, okay, hours worked, let's say 40, just a regular work week, and at $10 an hour. Now, the reason I'm putting in these simple values is it's easy for me to know what the answer ought to be 400, right? 40 times 10, and there it is, 400. I'm feeling pretty good about that. How about we run it again, and I'll go ahead and clear the output here. How about I run it again? This time, let's put in 45 hours at $10 an hour. And before we actually let the program run, let's think in our head what the answer should be. You should always try to anticipate what your answer should be before you run your program. That's a good programming habit. So if we put in 45 hours, well, we should get the $400 for the 40 hours at the regular rate. So that'd be $400. But then we're working 5 hours of overtime at time and a half, which would be $15 an hour. So 5 times 15 is $75. So this should be $475 if I did my math correctly. Let's try that. So we're going to work 45 hours at $10 an hour, and we got 475. So we're feeling pretty good about that. Now, I'm going to go ahead and stop here. I want you to, go through this, make sure you understand how it's working. But again, pay particular attention to how functions work in the sense of, you have a parameter list and you're going to pass values to that function. You're going to do something in the body of the function, and then you're going to return the result. This is a very common way for functions to work in programming. Often they expect some value to be passed in. You do something, some action in the body of the function, and then you return the result. It's relatively rare to actually print in the body of a function. You should return the result, and then maybe you have a different function for just doing the printing part. We didn't do that here. We just did that in the main line of our program here. So there's our final print of the output. So take a look at this. Please let me know if you have any questions about this. Don't hesitate to ask questions, okay?